As the first light of dawn filtered through the stained glass windows of medieval Europe, a world emerged shrouded in mystery, superstition, and raw brutality. The Middle Ages, stretching from the fall of the Roman Empire in the 5th century to the dawn of the Renaissance in the 15th century, witnessed both the rise of great kings like Richard the Lionheart and the pursuit of knowledge by philosophers such as Thomas Aquinas. However, for the common people, life was a relentless struggle marked by short-lived existence and constant hardship. Imagine the year 1348 in a bustling town square, as the ominous shadow of the Black Death looms over Europe. Carried by fleas on rats, it claimed nearly a third of the continent's population. How would you fend off such a deadly and invisible foe without the knowledge of modern medicine? In the absence of antibiotics or treatments, people could only turn to prayer or hope as the church bells tolled not only the hours, but the countless souls lost to this unseen enemy. Life was a cruel gamble in the Middle Ages, where a simple infection could spell death and where famine and disease stalked the land at every corner. Historian Geoffrey Chaucer's words, "Life is short, the craft so long to learn," encapsulate the fragility of existence in this era. With the unpredictability of feudal lords and society built on the whims of the powerful, survival was always uncertain. The Middle Ages were defined by a mix of faith, superstition, and brute survival, a world where human lives were subjected to the whims of fate. The heart of medieval medicine was a strange intersection of mysticism, ancient knowledge, and limited understanding. Physicians and apothecaries navigated a world full of herbal concoctions, whispered incantations, and age-old remedies. These early healers worked within a framework shaped by the belief in the four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Health was thought to be a balance of these humors, and disturbances could result in illness. Bloodletting, a common medieval practice, was one such intervention designed to restore harmony, where even the likes of Saint Hildegard of Bingen, a 12th century Benedictine abbess, endorsed its benefits. In addition to bloodletting, leeches were used widely in treatment, affectionately called doctor's assistants for their role in extracting bad blood from the body. While the sight of leeches on the skin might seem unsettling, they were essential to healing in the medieval period. At the same time, important figures like the Persian polymath Avicenna became celebrated for their medical works, including the Canon of Medicine, which integrated the teachings of Aristotle and Galen into a comprehensive medical guide. However, medieval medicine was riddled with practices that would make modern people cringe, including surgeries performed without anesthesia and the use of crude instruments. Medieval Europe's use of dangerous compounds like theriac demonstrated the reliance on traditional, sometimes superstitious remedies. While some healers offered genuine insights into the workings of the human body, many practices, like the lack of anesthesia during surgical procedures, meant that the experience of medical care was often as agonizing as the illness itself. Despite these challenges, figures like Paracelsus, a 16th century alchemist, challenged traditional methods by introducing the doctrine of signatures, which believed that plants carried signs indicating their medicinal properties. In the streets of medieval Europe, justice often took a brutal and public form. The concept of justice in the Middle Ages was both a spectacle and a warning to those who defied the moral codes of the time. The Tyburn tree in London, infamous for its public executions, symbolized a world where punishment was not only a means of law enforcement but also a social tool. Crime was met with harsh penalties meant to deter others, often in front of crowds who viewed the executions as both punishment and entertainment. The practice of corporal punishment, including mutilation and blinding, was widespread across Europe. The infamous laws of Fellard in England, which sanctioned the blinding and mutilation of criminals, became a precursor to the brutal treatments of the medieval penal system. Similarly, in France, the Bastille became not just a state prison but a symbol of royal authority, where high-profile prisoners, such as the Marquis de Sade and the Man in the Iron Mask, were detained. Trials in medieval Europe were as much about spectacle as they were about justice. Joan of Arc's trial, for example, became a political and religious circus, where her gender, heresy, and political motives were scrutinized publicly. Even the trial by ordeal, where the accused underwent dangerous tests to prove their innocence, was deeply embedded in medieval justice. If an accused person survived an ordeal, they were considered innocent by divine intervention. Medieval motherhood was a journey marked by profound love but also profound loss. In the 13th century, mothers across Europe faced constant risks during childbirth with no modern medical knowledge to help them. Pregnant women in places like Paris were surrounded by female relatives and midwives who would guide them through the birthing process. Yet, despite their best efforts and the knowledge passed down through generations, complications like infections and difficulties during delivery were common, turning joyous occasions into tragic events. For many, the risks of childbirth meant that only a small fraction of their children would survive to adulthood. Queen Eleanor of Castile, wife to Edward I of England, endured 16 pregnancies, but only 6 of her children survived into adulthood, a fate common to many in the medieval world. She was just one of countless women whose stories were defined by the fragility of life. While fathers, too, shared in this grief, their roles were often overlooked in historical accounts. King James I of Scotland's words, "Fortune has her honey mixed with gall," echo the sorrow of many fathers who experienced the pain of losing their children. The fragility of infant life was such that many children were not named until they had survived their first few weeks. The fear of loss loomed large as diseases like smallpox, malnutrition, and the harsh realities of medieval living claimed the lives of many young ones. Even royal families were not immune to this tragedy. Joan of England, the beloved daughter of King John, died as a baby on her way to marry her future husband. Her short life was a reminder of the ever-present danger of infant mortality in the medieval world. Religious faith was often the solace for grieving parents, and baptisms were hurriedly performed to ensure that the child's soul would rest in peace, regardless of their short life. Across Europe, small tombstones adorned with cherubic motifs dotted the graveyards, marking the lives of children lost far too soon. These tombstones, though tiny and simple, told a story of the fragility of life and the overwhelming love that parents had for their children, even in the face of inevitable loss. Medieval tournaments were more than just contests of skill. They were pivotal social events that combined chivalry, romance, and brutal violence. The origins of these tournaments were chaotic free-for-alls, where knights clashed in mock battles to capture and ransom their fellow combatants. However, as the centuries passed, these events evolved into more organized spectacles, with jousting becoming the main event. Knights charged at each other, aiming their lances at their opponent in a dramatic test of skill and strength. The sheer impact of these collisions often rivaled the force of a car crash, turning the arena into a dangerous battleground. These tournaments were not just about individual glory. They were an opportunity for knights to prove their mettle, to gain wealth, and to enhance their reputation. William Marshal, one of the most famous knights of the 12th century, earned his fame and fortune by performing brilliantly in tournaments. His victories allowed him to rise through the ranks of the nobility, eventually serving as the regent for King Henry III of England. Beyond the knights themselves, the tournaments attracted large audiences, including royals, nobles, and commoners. It was a social event, with spectators showing their support by throwing favors, like handkerchiefs or ribbons, to their chosen knights. These small gestures symbolized the bond between the knight and his supporter, further romanticizing the competition. Richard the Lionheart, the King of England, was an avid fan of these tournaments. and his presence lent an air of majesty to the already grand occasions. However, for all the pomp and pageantry, these events were not without their risks. In 1559, Henry II of France was fatally injured during a jousting match when a shard of a broken lance pierced his eye. His tragic death underscored the inherent danger of these tournaments, where the line between triumph and tragedy was often perilously thin. Despite the risks, tournaments remained an essential part of medieval life, symbolizing the balance between courage, honor, and the ever-present threat of death. The Vikings were fierce warriors and explorers who reshaped the medieval world. Their raids, which began in the 8th century, struck fear into the hearts of Europeans. The first recorded Viking raid occurred in 793 AD, when the Vikings attacked the monastery of Lindisfarne in northern England. This raid, which was a brutal assault on a religious center, marked the beginning of the Viking Age, a period of expansion and conquest that lasted for centuries. The Vikings were not just plunderers, they were also explorers, traders, and settlers. They established settlements in places like Ireland, Scotland, and Normandy, where they left lasting marks on the culture and history of these regions. Their raids also reached as far as the Mediterranean and North America. In France, the Viking leader Rollo established the Duchy of Normandy, which would later play a crucial role in English history. The Vikings were also involved in the Byzantine Empire, where they served as mercenaries in the Varangian Guard, an elite unit that protected the emperor. Their influence extended far beyond their raids, shaping the development of Europe during the Middle Ages. Despite their fearsome reputation, the Vikings' exploration and expansion laid the groundwork for the interconnected world of the later medieval period. Medieval Europe was a land teeming with superstition, and disease was one of the most terrifying specters that haunted its inhabitants. The Black Death, which struck in the mid-14th century, was one of the deadliest pandemics in history, wiping out nearly a third of Europe's population. The disease spread rapidly through trade routes, carried by fleas on rats, and decimated towns and villages. In its wake, fear and superstition took hold of the people. Amidst the terror, people turned to religion and superstitions for answers. Flagellant movements, where people whipped themselves in penance, gained popularity as a way to appease divine wrath. In England, the nursery rhyme, "Ring-a-ring o' roses," became associated with the plague, a reminder of the disease's devastating toll on the population. Leprosy was another invisible enemy that plagued medieval Europe. Lepers were often isolated in lazar houses, where they lived in squalid conditions away from the rest of society. The fear of disease and the widespread belief in the supernatural caused many to treat the afflicted with suspicion, leading to their social ostracism. In this world, where science was in its infancy, superstition and religion were often the guiding forces that shaped the lives of the people. The life of a serf in medieval Europe was a life of unyielding labor and silent suffering. The serfs were bound to the land, their fates inextricably linked to the whims of their feudal lords. In exchange for protection and the right to work the land, serfs were required to give a portion of their produce and labor to their lords. Their lives were defined by toil, with little chance for upward mobility. While some serfs dreamed of escaping their oppressive conditions, they often found that the shadow of servitude loomed large even in the towns and cities. The legendary tales of serfs buying their freedom were few and far between. The reality was one of unrelenting labor and sacrifice, where even marriages and the birth of children required the approval of the Lord. The Doomsday Book of 1086, which catalogued the lands and resources of England, referred to serfs as little more than property. Despite the harshness of their lives, serfs found moments of rebellion and resilience. As some communities negotiated charters of freedom, they offered a glimmer of hope to those trapped in a world of perpetual servitude. The Middle Ages was a time of immense challenge and profound hardship. The people of this era navigated a world shaped by superstition, disease, and the unyielding grip of feudalism. Whether facing the horrors of the Black Death, the brutality of medieval justice, or the oppressive system of serfdom, life in the Middle Ages was a test of endurance and resilience. Yet, amidst the trials and tribulations, the human spirit remained unbroken. The echoes of this age remind us of the strength of the human will to survive even in the most dire of circumstances. As we reflect on the hardships of medieval Europe, we gain a deeper understanding of how far humanity has come and how the trials of the past shaped the future we know today.